A people who had taught all of Greece to fear them were broken in public, not slowly, and not by some long decline buried in dusty records. In full view, on the plain near Leuctra, the most feared warriors in the Greek world were driven backward. Their king was struck down, their line collapsed, and the legend of Spartan invincibility died where everyone could see it. That is what made this battle more than a defeat. It was an exposure. A civilization that had built part of its power on disciplined violence and half-whispered terror was suddenly revealed to be mortal. For generations, Sparta had been more than a city and more than an army. It was a psychological weapon. Long before a Spartan shield wall arrived, its reputation had already entered the field. Cities hesitated. Enemies doubted themselves. Allies obeyed. Fathers warned sons what happened when Spartan discipline came forward in bronze and silence. The strength of Sparta was not only in training, courage, or endurance. It was an expectation. Greece had been taught that once Spartans reached the decisive point of battle, the rest was usually only a matter of time. But that image hid a harsher truth. Sparta's military greatness stood on a narrow and violent foundation. Its ruling warrior class was small. Beneath it lived the Helots, the vast enslaved population whose labor fed the Spartan system and whose numbers terrified it. Sparta trained for war not only to conquer abroad, but because it lived with fear at home. From the outside, the city looked like iron. Inside, it was under constant pressure. That pressure made it ruthless. It also made it brittle in ways the legend concealed. Still, to the wider Greek world, what mattered was the armor, the discipline, the control, and the long memory of victory. Sparta had humbled rivals, shaped alliances, and turned battlefield superiority into political authority. It had become something close to a law of nature. If the Spartan right wing came forward with its elite in the place of honor, many believed the battle was already beginning to turn. That assumption had lived so long in Greek warfare that it felt permanent. Then Thebes decided to challenge it. That is what gives Leuctra its charge. This was not merely a clash between two states. It was a confrontation between a ruling military myth and a commander who believed that myth could be broken. Thebes had known Spartan power up close. It had endured interference, domination, and humiliation. But pressure had not crushed it. Pressure had hardened it. Out of that hardening came a generation of leaders who did not simply hate Sparta. They studied it. And among them stood Epaminondas. He was not a king, not a theatrical conqueror, not a giant personality wrapped in imperial display. That is part of what makes him so dangerous in hindsight. He was a disciplined mind in a brutal age, a man who looked at the most feared military system in Greece and concluded that it could be solved. Not endured, not avoided, solved. The road to Leuctra ran through the unstable politics of post-war Greece. Sparta had won supremacy, but supremacy brought resentment, overreach, and resistance. Thebes rose in defiance. Tensions sharpened. Diplomacy failed. A Spartan army under King Cleombrotus marched into Boeotia with the confidence of a state that had spent generations seeing its battlefield prestige confirmed. It was larger, supported by allies, and anchored by the elite Spartan core. If Greece believed any battlefield truth at all, it was this: the Spartan right wing, properly formed and properly driven, would crush what stood before it. Epaminondas understood exactly where that strength would be. On the Spartan right, that was tradition, status, and doctrine. The best men in the place of honor, where the decisive blow was expected to land. Greek warfare often had a brutal simplicity. Two heavy infantry lines closed. Each side tried to overpower the other. The strongest wing often determined the outcome. Sparta had lived inside that pattern for so long that it must have felt eternal. Epaminondas chose to break the pattern. He did not mirror the Spartan line. He did not spread his forces evenly and hope courage would compensate for reputation. He concentrated power. He deepened his left wing into an extraordinary mass and placed his strongest troops there, including the sacred band. Instead of avoiding the Spartan elite, he aimed straight at them. That choice was not merely tactical. It was psychological violence. Most commanders would have tried to soften contact with Sparta's strongest point, survive the impact, and look for an opening elsewhere. Epaminondas decided to smash the strongest point first. That decision changed the meaning of the battle before the lines even met. Leuctra was open enough that the old assumptions could still breathe. This was not a narrow pass where terrain might rescue the weak or confuse the strong. It was the kind of ground where Spartan confidence could feel justified. Somewhere inside that confidence was the fatal mistake. Sparta had spent too long teaching everyone else to fear the script. It had forgotten what would happen if someone rewrote it. Before the infantry collision, there were warning signs. Theban cavalry performed better than expected and helped disorder the Spartan front. That mattered because ancient battles depended on timing, cohesion, and control. A line did not need to be shattered to be endangered. It only needed to be disturbed at the wrong moment. But cavalry disruption alone does not kill a legend. The real test was still coming on foot, in the brutal crush of shield against shield. Then the Theban left advanced. Not as a balanced answer, as a hammer. The depth of the formation gave weight to the push and pressure to the point of contact. The rest of the Theban line was held back more cautiously, angled and delayed, refusing a straightforward engagement until the decisive strike landed where Epaminondas wanted it. He was not trying to win everywhere. He was trying to break the one point Sparta believed could not be broken. At the center of that collision stood Cleombrotus and a Spartan elite, facing not a nervous enemy trying to endure contact, but a mass designed to overwhelm them at the exact place of their greatest pride. When the lines met, the fighting was savage, immediate, and close. Bronze slammed into bronze. Spears splintered. Men were shoved sideways, jammed together, and driven backward step by step in a choking wall of dust, pressure, and noise. Ground that had been expected to witness another Spartan lesson in discipline instead witnessed the beginning of something Greece had almost stopped imagining. The Spartan right did not simply stall. It started to fail. That failure was not abstract. It was visible. For generations, armies had watched Spartans advance and assumed the rest would follow. At Leuctra, men saw Spartans under pressure. They saw the line bend. They saw the most feared infantry in Greece losing ground where it was supposed to dominate. Once that image existed, once soldiers across the field understood that Sparta could be forced backward, the old order began to die before the battle was even over. Cleombrotus was fatally wounded in the crush. That mattered far beyond the death of a single king. In ancient warfare, command lived in sight and presence. A wounded or dying king did not just remove orders. He damaged confidence at the worst possible moment. And confidence was exactly what Sparta could least afford to lose in the one battle where its reputation was being tested at the point of honor. The Theban mass kept driving. This was the cold genius of Epaminondas. He had not built a formation for spectacle. He had built one for destruction. The depth behind the front ranks was not passive. It was force. It turned contact into compression and compression into panic. The Spartans had spent generations teaching others how terrifying that feeling could be. Now they were the ones experiencing it. A viewer raised on the Spartan legend might expect a recovery here. A rally. One last proof of superior discipline. But no reputation can hold a line together once the physical logic of the fight has turned against it. When men lose footing, alignment, and shield contact, courage alone is not enough. Battle becomes mechanical and then mortal. The Spartan right began to come apart. That was the moment the impossible became real. The retreat widened. Disorder spread. Allied contingents who had marched under Spartan prestige suddenly had to decide whether that prestige still meant anything. Some did not wait to find out. Once the elite corps was beaten back, the entire field changed its meaning. What collapsed at Leuctra was not just a wing of an army. It was the aura of guaranteed superiority. The losses for Sparta were catastrophic in a way raw numbers cannot fully express. Spartan citizen manpower had always been limited, and it had been narrowing for years. Another Greek state might lose heavily and recover through time, recruitment, or political adaptation. Sparta did not have that luxury. When full Spartan fighting men died, they took with them irreplaceable pieces of the state's core. Leuctra did not simply kill soldiers. It killed Spartans Sparta could not easily replace. That is why the battle was more than a tactical upset. It was a wound to the underlying structure of Spartan power. Because beneath the armor and ritual, Sparta had already been weakening. Its citizen body had thinned. Wealth had concentrated. The old ideal of equality among Spartan citizens had hardened into something smaller, narrower, and more fragile. Fewer true Spartans meant fewer men to fight, fewer men to police the helots, fewer men to sustain the image of effortless dominance. The state that looked eternal from the outside was shrinking from within. Leuctra struck that narrowing body at exactly the wrong moment. And Thebes understood what it had done. Epaminondas did not treat victory as a trophy. He treated it as an opening. That is one reason Leuctra mattered so much. Too many battles burned brightly for a day and changed little afterward. This one changed what became possible. Once Sparta had been beaten in open battle, the taboo was gone. The spell had been broken. Enemy armies could now move against Spartan power at its roots. Soon pressure turned south into the Peloponnese itself. That would once have seemed almost unthinkable. For generations, Spartan dominance in that region had been protected by fear as much as by force. Now that fear was damaged beyond repair, cities and peoples who had lived under the Spartan shadow could imagine another future. And the deepest blow was not merely military. It was social. Sparta's greatness depended on the labor of the Helots, especially in Messenia. These were the people who worked the land while Spartan citizens trained, ruled, and fought. Every polished shield, every drill, every ritual meal rested on coerced labor maintained through terror. When Theban success helped crack that system and open the path toward Messenian freedom, Sparta lost something no battlefield discipline could restore. A city can survive defeat. An army can be rebuilt. But when the social engine beneath military power is torn loose, the whole structure begins to sink. That is the darker truth behind Leuctra. Sparta was not merely beaten by another army. It was exposed by a rival that studied its habits, understood its rigidity, and struck where pride was thickest. Greeks had watched Sparta dominate Greeks for generations. Now Greeks watched Greeks prove Sparta could bleed like anyone else. And yet even that triumph carried poison. Thebes rose, but it did not create lasting harmony. Victory shattered one center of power without building a stable new one. Greek politics remained fractured, tense, and suspicious. The old intimidator was diminished, but no durable order replaced it. In that broken landscape, new powers would eventually rise. Macedon would inherit a world already loosened by the collapse of earlier certainties. So what really died at Leuctra? Not just a king, not just the Spartan wing, not only the prestige of one city. What died was the belief that Sparta represented the natural order of Greek war. What died was the assumption that discipline without imagination would always prevail. What died was the terror that had done half of Sparta's fighting before the first spear struck. Epaminondas did not simply defeat Spartan soldiers. He broke the invisible structure around them, the structure that had made others yield before contact. And once a myth is forced into the dirt, it does not rise again in the same shape. That is why Leuctra matters. Not because it brought Greece peace. It did not. Not because it created a beautiful new order. It did not. It matters because it revealed a law that returns throughout history with brutal consistency. Every dominant power eventually mistakes habit for destiny. Every feared elite begins to believe its image can replace adaptation. And when the right enemy appears, one who sees clearly and strikes without reverence, collapse can come all at once. At Leuctra, Sparta lost a battle. After Leuctra, it lost the structure that made that battle survivable. And in the long memory of history, it lost something greater than land or men. It lost the right to be imagined as unconquerable.